In a significant development in U.S.-Canadian trade relations, President Trump has announced a one-month delay in implementing 25% tariffs on Canadian imports, originally scheduled for April 2nd. This follows extensive negotiations and concerns about economic impact on both sides. Canadian Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc confirmed Canada would postpone its retaliatory tariffs, valued at $12.25 billion, until April 7th. The initial Canadian tariffs on $30 billion of U.S. goods remain in place. British Columbia's response has been notable, given its position between the U.S. mainland and Alaska. BC Premier David Eby announced plans for legislation to impose tolls on commercial vehicles traveling to Alaska, sending what he called a clear message to the President, Alaska's Republican congressional representatives, and the state's Republican governor. The BC legislation includes requirements for low-carbon fuel additives in gasoline and diesel to be produced within Canada, aiming to strengthen Canadian economic independence while addressing environmental concerns. Despite Trump's partial scaling back of tariffs, Premier Eby remains firm. "We will not tolerate these ongoing threats and uncertainty. We're standing up for Canadians. This behavior is unacceptable, and we are making it clear to the U.S. just how frustrated we are." While the number of trucks affected by potential tolls would be small, the symbolic impact is significant. "The White House has launched a trade war we never wanted, and we must respond decisively," Eby emphasized, suggesting these measures are initial steps in protecting Canadian economic interests. This trade tension reflects similar situations globally, where allies find themselves at odds over economic policies. The situation shows how regional governments can leverage their positions to influence international trade disputes. As both nations navigate this diplomatic and economic landscape, the coming weeks will determine whether these measures lead to escalation or more stable trade relations. The impact on businesses and consumers remains a concern as this dispute evolves. In a significant escalation of trade tensions between the United States and Canada, British Columbia's government is preparing to launch aggressive countermeasures against U.S. trade policies. Premier Eby has announced comprehensive legislation aimed at protecting Canadian jobs and businesses from what officials describe as economic aggression under the Trump administration. The province's multi-pronged approach includes several bold initiatives. Most notably, BC plans to implement tolls on U.S. commercial vehicles traveling through the province to Alaska, a move that could significantly impact cross-border transportation costs. Additionally, the government has ordered the BC Liquor Distribution Branch to cease purchases of American liquor products from red states, effectively removing these brands from public liquor store shelves. In a strategic shift toward domestic resource utilization, BC will require that low-carbon fuel additives for gasoline and diesel be sourced within Canada. This requirement aims to boost local production while reducing dependence on U.S. imports. The province is also fast-tracking major investment projects valued at $20 billion, expected to create 8,000 new jobs, particularly benefiting rural and remote communities. To coordinate these efforts, Premier A has established multiple task forces, including a Trade and Economic Security Task Force, an Agriculture and Food Economy Task Force, a BC Softwood Advisory Council, a dedicated cabinet committee. These groups bring together leaders from business, labor, and Indigenous communities to develop comprehensive strategies for economic resilience. The initiatives align with broader federal measures, including Canada's 25% tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. imports. British Columbia's response represents part of a unified Team Canada approach, with provinces across the country implementing similar protective measures. The government emphasizes that these actions, while defensive in nature, are designed to strengthen Canada's economic independence and protect its workers from external trade pressures. Good morning, I'm John Mitchell with today's top story about a critical aspect of U.S.-Canadian relations that affects millions of Americans. Today, we're exploring how Canada serves as the vital bridge connecting Alaska to the rest of the United States, a relationship that's increasingly significant amid current trade tensions. Consider this. Every time you drive to Alaska from the mainland U.S., you must traverse Canadian territory. The Alaska Highway, or Alcan Highway, stretches from Dawson Creek in British Columbia to Delta Junction, Alaska. This isn't just any road. It's a lifeline built during World War II that serves as the primary overland connection between Alaska and the lower 48 states. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not just about roads. The airspace above Canada is equally crucial. Nearly every flight between Alaska and the continental United States depends on Canadian airspace and air traffic control systems. Many flights make technical stops in Canadian cities, highlighting the cooperation between our nations. The trade implications are substantial. While there's no direct railway linking Alaska to the continental U.S., Canadian infrastructure fills this gap. The Port of Vancouver serves as a major hub for Alaska-bound shipments. Essential supplies, from food to fuel to construction materials, must travel through Canadian ports and railways. This geographical reality creates an interesting dynamic. While trade disputes have strained U.S.-Canadian relations, both nations must maintain cooperation for Alaska's well-being. Every border crossing, shipment, and flight depends on this balance of international cooperation. For Americans in Alaska, this means their daily lives are directly impacted by U.S.-Canadian relations. Any disruption in this relationship could affect everything from food prices to travel options. This interdependence adds another layer of complexity to ongoing trade negotiations between the two nations. This is John Mitchell, reporting on the unique challenges in North American continental connections. In a significant escalation of trade tensions between the United States and Canada, Alaska's crucial economic lifeline through Canadian territory has become a focal point of growing concern. Analysis reveals that over $1.3 billion in annual trade between Alaska and Canada now faces potential disruption amid diplomatic strains. Nova Scotia's Premier Tim Houston announced countermeasures against American business interests. The province has implemented restrictions, including removing U.S.-made alcoholic products from Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation stores and doubling tolls for American commercial vehicles on the Cobequid Pass. The stakes are high for Alaska, which relies heavily on Canadian infrastructure. Current data shows that approximately $596 million in Alaskan exports to Canada and $753 million in imports could be affected by these tensions. Energy sector analysts note that Alaska's oil and natural gas exports, which depend on Canadian transit routes, might face challenges. The Inside Passage, connecting southeastern Alaska with British Columbia, remains critical for commercial shipping and tourism. Ferry operations, including the Alaska Marine Highway System and BC Ferries, continue to operate, though experts express concern about potential regulatory changes. Premier Houston's description of President Trump's policies as short-sighted and reckless marks a departure from typically diplomatic language. Nova Scotia's decision to ban American businesses from bidding on provincial government contracts signals a more confrontational approach in relations. The province's establishment of a contingency fund in the 2025-2026 budget to counter tariff impacts demonstrates the long-term nature of these challenges. This preparation suggests Canadian provinces are bracing for extended trade uncertainty. In a dramatic escalation of North American trade tensions, Canadian provinces are taking unprecedented steps to counter U.S. economic measures, demonstrating rare national unity. Our analysis reveals a coordinated response reshaping continental trade. Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta has characterized U.S. actions as an unjustifiable economic attack, warning of potential backfire effects harmful to both nations. Alberta promises retaliatory measures within 24 hours. Manitoba's Premier Wab Kinew has taken action, removing American alcohol products from Manitoba liquor marts. Newfoundland and Labrador's Premier Andrew Furey has implemented a response, removing U.S. products from provincial liquor stores and reviewing American procurement contracts. This is about more than trade. It's about Canadian values and sovereignty, declared Furey, who established a round table on Canada-U.S. trade relations. The federal government is accelerating efforts to diversify trade partnerships in Europe and Asia, with new grant programs and financing options helping Canadian businesses access alternative markets. British Columbia is fast-tracking international projects, while Atlantic provinces pursue European markets for seafood exports. Industry analysts note that while geography has made the U.S. Canada's natural trading partner, recent tensions are catalyzing market diversification. The government is leveraging existing trade agreements, including the CPTPP and CETA, to build stronger economic ties beyond North America. Premier Smith's call for eliminating internal trade barriers has gained traction, with provinces discussing ways to strengthen domestic market integration. This focus on internal trade could reshape Canada's economic landscape, reducing U.S. Market dependence. We're witnessing a pivotal moment in Canadian economic history, notes trade expert Dr. Sarah Thompson. These coordinated provincial responses could permanently alter North American trade dynamics. Good morning. I'm John Mitchell, with breaking news on the evolving trade landscape between North American partners. Canadian officials are actively pursuing new trade alliances across Asia-Pacific and Latin American regions, aiming to reduce their dependence on U.S. markets. Reports indicate that Canadian manufacturers and agricultural producers are exploring alternative export channels, particularly in Japan and Europe. This comes as talks with India and other emerging economies show promise for expanding trade opportunities. Trade tensions between these North American neighbors have deep roots. The softwood lumber dispute, originating in 1982, stands as one of the most contentious issues. U.S. lumber industries have accused Canadian producers of receiving unfair subsidies, leading to countervailing duties that Canada contests. Trade conflicts between these nations often follow a pattern. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 serves as a reminder, when increased U.S. duties prompted Canadian retaliation across 16 product categories, causing economic downturn for both nations. In 1971, President Nixon's administration imposed a 10% surcharge on imports, including Canadian goods, during a currency crisis. This strain resolved within months through monetary agreements, but set a precedent for future tensions. The 2002 steel tariffs under President George W. Bush, which initially exempted Canada and Mexico under NAFTA provisions, demonstrate how trade relationships can be protected by existing agreements. This explains why Canadian officials are pushing for a broader free trade ecosystem that reduces U.S. dependency. Trade experts note that while transitioning away from U.S. markets will take time, circumstances have created unprecedented urgency. Canadian retailers are already adapting by substituting U.S. goods with domestic or overseas products, signaling a shift in North American trade dynamics. In a significant development highlighting ongoing trade tensions between the United States and Canada, experts are analyzing the impact of previous trade disputes as new challenges emerge. Our analysis reveals how past confrontations shaped current diplomatic strategies between these North American neighbors. Looking back at 2018-2019 under President Trump's administration, steel and aluminum tariffs, justified under national security concerns, triggered a Canadian response. Ottawa's retaliatory measures targeted metals and politically sensitive American goods. This approach proved effective, as the dispute ended when the U.S. lifted its metal tariffs in exchange for USMCA concessions. The episode taught Canadian leaders that robust retaliation can effectively bring the U.S. back to negotiations. The coordination between federal, provincial, and industry stakeholders showed the power of unity in trade disputes. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's declaration that Canada will not be pushed around established a precedent influencing current diplomatic exchanges. Today's tariff threats have prompted similar responses from Ottawa and provinces. However, the latest U.S. measures raise questions under international trade law. Canadian officials argue these 25% tariffs on Canadian imports violate USMCA provisions and WTO regulations regarding most favored nation treatment and bound tariff rates. The U.S. administration links these measures to national security concerns, citing an emergency over fentanyl trafficking. However, trade experts note that using health or security pretexts for comprehensive tariffs is unprecedented. Previous WTO rulings have viewed broad interpretations of national security exceptions with skepticism. Canada maintains options for challenging these tariffs through the USMCA's dispute resolution process. This mechanism begins with consultations and could lead to a panel ruling. Should the U.S. refuse to comply with an adverse ruling, Canada would be authorized to implement countermeasures. Breaking news on the North American trade dispute. Bringing you the latest developments in the economic showdown between the United States and Canada. Our northern neighbors aren't taking these trade pressures lying down. Despite typically lengthy legal processes, Canada has launched immediate countermeasures to shield its economy, implementing retaliatory tariffs without hesitation. Canada isn't putting all its eggs in one basket. They're pursuing multiple strategies, including filing complaints with the World Trade Organization. However, enforcement could prove tricky if the U.S. decides not to comply with panel decisions. Canada's legal approach includes filing formal disputes and invoking remedial clauses within the USMCA agreement. They're exploring options to suspend trade concessions and considering challenges through domestic courts. U.S. courts historically give presidents substantial leeway on trade restrictions, especially under emergency powers. Resolution likely won't come through courtrooms. Experts suggest negotiation and political pressure will be the deciding factors. This isn't just about legal victories. It's about finding common ground in a changing economic landscape. This trade war is reshaping North American economic relationships. Canada's standing firm, showing unprecedented resolve in protecting its interests. The question remains: will these countermeasures achieve their intended effect? Keep an eye on how these retaliatory measures impact both economies, whether diplomatic channels open up, and if other trading partners get involved. This situation mirrors other global trade disputes, particularly in the northern Black Sea region, where economic pressures have led to policy shifts. The parallels are striking, though the context is distinctly North American. We'll keep monitoring these developments as this economic chess game unfolds. In today's